Hello everyone, welcome to version 1.2 of my Resident Evil 3 Remake, Infernal difficulty, no damage, no shop items, S-rank walkthrough, and this is going to be the full game. And after doing so much content for Resident Evil Village, I think it's time I did another Resident Evil game, and I've been wanting to do another walkthrough of this game again, especially since I'm recording on the PS5 now. Originally, my other versions of this walkthrough were done on PS4, but having the chance to actually showcase this game at 60 FPS and with a lot more experience on my part when it comes to commentary, it's really nice to go through this again. And also, the fact that I played through Resident Evil Village, it's nice to actually have another Resident Evil game to compare to Resident Evil 3 Remake. And I guess I have to thank Ether for the additional motivation with actually doing this walkthrough again, because after watching his Resident Evil 3 Remake content and also watching his original version of Resident Evil 3 walkthrough, it was definitely helpful in allowing me to do this commentary again. And for version 1.2, a lot of the strategies that you're going to be seeing are very similar to what you'd be seeing on version 1.1. I mean, there are some minor deviations here and there, but you'll notice that I put a lot more edits this time to reduce a lot of the downtime, to make it easier for myself, and to make this walkthrough a lot more digestible for you viewers. So it's good that I'm doing that. And moving past that, there is a lot to say when it comes to comparing Resident Evil 3 Remake to Resident Evil Village. Because originally, I considered Resident Evil Village to have a lot more bullshit and a lot more disappointing moments compared to Resident Evil 3 Remake. But after doing this walkthrough again and going through a lot of the sections, I have to say that Resident Evil 3 Remake has a lot more bullcrap compared to Resident Evil Village. And I know, that just seems like a shock. If you watch my blind playthrough and you watch my walkthroughs, you will hear me say so many times that Resident Evil Village has so much bullcrap. But now that I think about it, the scenarios that Resident Evil 3 Remake puts you in, compared to the scenarios that Resident Evil Village puts you in, I don't feel like the bullcrap is equal between the two. I feel like the bullcrap is a little bit more noticeable in Resident Evil 3 Remake when it comes to poor designs compared to Resident Evil Village. And while Resident Evil Village does have a lot of those poor designs, especially when you're talking about Bella and the two Moriekas and how they affect your AI so much, and like the fact that they just don't flinch properly from the shotgun and they have way too much life, and then encounters with Moreau, for instance, where Moreau has so much life and you're having to be so reliant upon explosives, and there's no telling what kind of behavior he chooses to elicit because his programming is just not very good. And I don't know if I should really be saying that, though, about Moreau, because the strategy that I found for dealing with Moreau, it is very effective against him, and I can't wait to showcase it in my updated walkthrough of Resident Evil Village. But even still, though, it's hard to get a lot of consistency with Moreau because of how poorly designed he is. But it's really those two encounters in Resident Evil Village that come to mind, whereas in Resident Evil 3 Remake, there's a lot more bullcrap with the encounters. Like, this Drain Demo section right here, this Drain Demo section is definitely a very difficult part to get a lot of consistency on, especially after you activate the second breaker. When you're activating the third breaker, and then you try to clear out all the Drain Demos, it can be very random how the encounter turns out, and there's so many opportunities for the Drain Demos' AI to really mess up, because when you have multiple AI near each other, the game just cannot decide which enemy it should prioritize, and you get this behavior a lot with the Drain Demos when they have such a hard time deciding when to attack you, and then you get those moments where the Drain Demos, they're supposed to run away after they initiate an attack, but then there are times when they don't do that, and they just take quite a while to get to you even when they're off camera, and the Drain Demos behave like stalkers in this section where they mainly attack you when they're off camera. But at least a lot of that RNG is reserved for the later part of the section. This initial beginning to the Drain Demo section works really well because it's always consistent. Those first three Drain Demos are always in the same positions. The third Drain Demos, he's in the same general area, but he can choose to do different things. Sometimes he'll rush you immediately. Other times he'll set up in corners. There's two different corners that he can appear in. So you got to bear that in mind with that particular Drain Demos, but he's easy to deal with. And then you can always get rid of that fourth Drain Demos after you pick up the fancy box. And then every time you hit a breaker, the Drain Demos will always spawn right near you. And the Drain Demos are a really good enemy. They're definitely one of my favorite enemy types in the game. And just look at the amount of punishment that they take, and just look at the hit stun on them. You don't get this kind of like feedback in Resident Evil Village because the enemy types in Resident Evil Village are so simplistically designed. They have way too much life. There's no intelligence displayed with them whatsoever. They aren't placed in the environment very well, and there's so many opportunities for them to be completely fucking bullshit. They just take advantage of the flaws present with the design philosophy in Resident Evil Village, and they use that to get a cheap advantage over you. And it's just so fucking retarded that this developer that made these kind of enemies and design philosophies in Resident Evil 3 Remake, it's so insulting that they could go away from a lot of these really cool moments with the feedback that actually gives a lot of weight to your weapons. It actually makes it feel like a survival horror game. Like, the fact that they could go away from that and just favor this RPG design with Resident Evil Village and just not put any effort into anything when it comes to the enemies. Even though I have found some very interesting designs with some of the enemies in Resident Evil Village, it still doesn't excuse the fact that there are just a lot more designs that are lost with the enemies compared to designs that are already there with the enemies, and it's just better to run right past them because of how shit they're designed. And I feel like new Capcom only did it that way to force you to save up on ammunition to deal with the damaged spongy bosses. They're using the poor designs to justify the ammo management in Resident Evil Village. And admittedly, Resident Evil 3 Remake has a lot of that as well. There's a lot of bullshit involved in Resident Evil 3 Remake, and they do use a lot of the poor designs in this game to justify the ammo management, but at least with the design philosophy that Resident Evil 3 Remake favors, it doesn't have a immersion system. Ammunition actually feels like it matters with the feedback that you're getting, and there's a little bit more intelligence displayed with how the enemies are designed. I mean, the zombies, on the other hand, are a very different story. And, you know, like, certain enemies, like, for instance, with the Anti-Alpha Parasite and the Paleheads, are just very broken enemies. So the bullcrap is there as well. And, you know, now that I think about it, it's very hard to really consider from an enemy philosophy which game has the worst enemy designs. Because Resident Evil 3 Remake, you're dealing with a lot more bullshit enemies. And then with Resident Evil Village, you spend more time running past the enemies and using, like, flash grenades, for instance, to get past the enemies, or with actually using exploits, or with baiting out those running grabs that the Lycans do, or with just using sprint counters to your advantage, so you don't really spend a lot of time dealing with the enemies, and that's just what makes the enemies feel more like obstacles in Resident Evil Village rather than actual enemy types, which is just so fucking disappointing. So it's really hard to narrow down a real distinction between the two enemies. Oh, and by the way, this sequence right here, this is another bullshit moment that you really don't get a lot of in Resident Evil Village. So, this Magnum shot, if this Magnum shot doesn't stun this enemy, you have no chance of getting past this section consistently. Why doesn't the Magnum shot instantly kill him when you just nail him in the chest area? And apparently, if you hit his arm, it seems to prioritize that, rather than actually killing him. The amount of times I have shot my Magnum at him, and he has not responded to the feedback that's supposed to be elicited by the Magnum, is absurd. And I'm sure you might be saying, oh, just aim for the legs. Well, if I aim for the legs, it'll delay the other zombie, and it'll mess with the timing on my dodge. And also, if I aim for his leg, or he decides to stumble forward, and he grabs my leg, and I do that whole animation of trying to shake him off my legs, I'll be invulnerable during the animation, but the zombie will just spam his grab twice, and he'll just grab me, and then there's the perfect opportunity for Nemesis to damage me when he grabs me. And it's just so bullshit. You should not be putting in such animations in a fast-paced game, especially when you have as relentless a pursuer as Nemesis, or when you have zombies that have the ability to do the Anti-Alpha grab at a long range. You cannot do that with this kind of game. What the fuck were they thinking when they were designing this? It's so stupid. Anyone and their mother would be able to think that this is poorly designed and it should not be in the game. But no, new Capcom decided to put that in, and it's just so retarded. But that right there, you need to lure Nemesis to the door so that he kills the zombies. Sometimes he doesn't kill the zombies if the zombies path in a weird way. And then you need to make sure that you get past him when he's going through the door, and you need to make sure that he gets stuck behind the doors. And then when you get down the stairs, you gotta hope he doesn't catch up to you. If he catches up to you, you'll need to dodge and use the generator to your advantage. And if you get to the donut shop before he even gets to you, he will despawn, and then you gotta use a magnum shot to kill both of those zombies. And then you just gotta make sure you dodge Nemesis when he decides to sprint at you. And hopefully, when you do the soft lock with your aiming while you're dodging, you'll be able to hit his weak spot with the magnum, and you'll be able to elicit a stun. If you do not get the stun, he will hit you. I've actually saved footage of that happening, where I've done the same method before, but because he didn't get stunned by the magnum, he got a free hit on me. It's just so fucking retarded. Like, again, the bullshit is more noticeable in this game compared to Resident Evil Village, now that I think about it. I think at this point with Resident Evil Village, I've gotten past a lot of the bullshit involved with some of the sections, because there's really not a lot of sections where combat is really emphasized in Resident Evil Village. And even if there are a lot of enemies, there's a chance to use exploit areas or just bait out running grabs and the lichens in order to deal with them. And you have a lot of the tools necessary to bypass a lot of the bullshit involved with those sections. But this right here, wait for Nemesis to walk 5 times, and then you need to use a grenade at the top of the stairs right over here. But keep the camera on Nemesis, because Nemesis has the ability to teleport whenever he is off camera, and I'm going to use that to my advantage. Sometimes Nemesis is a little slow to teleport right here. I don't know why it's so inconsistent with this guy, but it's a little bit more consistent if you go all the way to the right and then you move forward. But you need to use a grenade right there. The reason why you have to use a grenade is to complement the explosive barrel, because if you just use the explosive barrel by itself, there are times when it doesn't stun Nemesis. Why is that a thing? Why are there so many moments with that where the stuns can be very inconsistent with the red barrel? It has almost the same kind of explosive potential as a normal grenade, yet it doesn't stun Nemesis properly. I even showcase this in my Poor Designs of Resident Evil 3 Remake video series. Like, that is just so stupid, and I have to waste a grenade in order to do something that should have been easily programmed by the developers. You know, there's just a lot of lazy programming involved with new Capcom. And I've already discussed such lazy programming before in Resident Evil Village, like for instance with the way the knife is designed in Resident Evil Village, and the fact that modders not associated with new Capcom have had to go in there and actually rewrite the programming to make the knife function the same way as the knife from Resident Evil 7. The fact that people had to do that rather than a development team just highlights how lackadaisical, lazy, and sloth the new developers at Capcom are when it comes to general programming and simple programming designs. It's mind-boggling and absolutely insulting that new Capcom, in their development video for Resident Evil Village, said they put a lot of hard work into Resident Evil Village, yet they don't even have the decency to iron out the basic programming involved with Resident Evil Village, and also with certain basic programming elements with Resident Evil 3 Remake. But this right here, this is bullshit, because Nemesis is placed so close to you at the beginning of this encounter, so if you are not running immediately when the cutscene ends, he will always hit you, and you need to make sure you have your pistol equipped so that you can use this generator over here. And also, a minor deviation you're going to see from my previous versions of this walkthrough is I'm going to skip out on the pistol ammo and the shotgun ammo that you can get from Nemesis. I'm just going to head straight for the vent, and Nemesis will not have enough time to catch me. I think when he's off camera, he moves a little slower. If he's on camera, he moves a lot faster. That's just what I've noticed, because he never seems to go into the whole animation of prepping his very slow uppercut. But now we have this section right here. This is a section designed by old Capcom. The enemies are placed intelligently. The feedback systems are involved with the enemies on this section are wonderful. This is a Resident Evil 4 section right here. And why the fuck would they not include such sections like this in Resident Evil Village? And the closest thing we ever get to such sections like this in Resident Evil Village is in Heisenberg's factory when you're dealing with the soldats. And I've demonstrated in some of my videos, my most recent videos for Resident Evil Village, that the stuns on the Berserk Soldat 1 and the Soldat 2 are incredible, because it's not dependent upon arbitrary damage values like some stupid game, like some RPG game, and it just takes you out of the experience when you realize you're not in some kind of survival horror environment, you're instead in a game environment. Like, the stuns that I've showcased with that are not dependent upon arbitrary damage values, they're instead dependent upon the number of times the Berserk Soldat 1 and the Berserk Soldat 2 repeat their combo, and you can use this to your advantage in order to eliminate them knife only. The only problem is, there is no incentive to deal with them, because new Capcom has this tendency of including very cool designs with the enemies, yet there is never any incentive to actually partake in such systems. However, this is a major exception, because there is actual incentive to indulge in the knife counter system involved with the Hunter Gammas. That right there is realistic feedback. I am knocking him off balance because he has a big head and he has very tiny legs. There is no possible way that his legs can possibly like support his big head. So using my knife, I am able to knock him down and get a guaranteed stun, and I'm able to get past the section. This section encourages skill. Remember when skill used to be a big thing in the older Resident Evil games, but now they've moved away from that, and instead, they favor either little to no skill involved because of how simplistically designed sections are in the newer Resident Evil games, from Resident Evil 2 Remake and onward, or they decide to favor sections and enemy design philosophies that are more dependent upon arbitrary damage values and arbitrary damage output on high-powered weapons, and even then, you don't get that with some of the sections in Resident Evil Village or with some of the enemies in Resident Evil Village. Like, why would they move away from skill in the new Capcom versions of Resident Evil? Like, remember when skillful use of the knife was actually encouraged in the Resident Evil games before Resident Evil 2 Remake? Remember how much the knife was actually used so much to actually save on your ammo in those games? I'm not including the older Resident Evil games, of course, because the older Resident Evil games, there's no skill involved with ammo management at all. And I'm specifically referring to Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 1 Remake and Resident Evil 2 Remake. Like, those games, there is no ammo management involved because the ammo is largely superfluous. It serves no purpose. All it does is just make New Game Plus a little bit more interesting. And that's just what it feels like when you use the weapons in those games. It feels like you're playing on New Game Plus. Like, every single design put in place in those games, when it comes to the enemy placements, when it comes to the way the lack of diverse scenarios just plays a role in those games, everything is done in order to encourage you to use the knife, and they even give you trophies in certain games to actually beat those games knife only without any other tools at your disposal. Like, everything is done to force you to use the knife, to actually get over the fact that the whole idea of ammo management is an illusion in those games. And the level design further complements this because the way the enemies are placed and the way the environments are laid out, it's all done in a way to allow you to get past those sections without ever having to use your weapons, only to use your knife. I've demonstrated this so many times in my walkthroughs, and yet there are still people that want to cling on to this whole fantasy of ammo management as if it's somehow more crucial in those games compared to the newer Resident Evil games. But I'm sorry guys, that right there is a completely delusional statement. Like, skill was so heavily encouraged in these games, but now, from Resident Evil 2 Remake and onward, the skill aspect that was highly encouraged in those games is almost negligible at this point, and very rarely will you ever come across a section that demands a lot of skill. And also right here, this is a little deviation I'm doing. So I'm actually coming into this room, and you actually get a hip pouch and high-grade gunpowder, and I didn't even realize you could get high-grade gunpowder from here, so it's actually very helpful. And you can tell I've not done this kind of deviation before because I missed out on the battery pack. And that right there just allowed the 100 Gamma to get really close to me, but I'm able to get past him because he will not follow you this way. Like, this is the only part of the game where I really feel like old Capcom had a hand in actually making a skillfully designed section that is befitting for a Resident Evil game. You will not get this same kind of feeling from a section from any other game except for Resident Evil. That right there is a masterpiece of a section. And I imagine Ether might disagree with me on this, because I remember when he disagreed with me when he said that the enemy placements that you got in the basement area of the Baker household with the placement of the fast molder were not intelligent. And while he did see eye to eye with me on this when I was further discussing this whole point with him, it still kind of confused me as to why he felt that way. No offense to the guy at all, because he's still a very fun guy to talk to, but I guess that's the whole value of having people like Ether as friends when they actually make those kind of statements, because it allows me to take the time to further reinforce my own argument and to really gain a new kind of perspective on a situation that I'm already well familiar with. But right now, we have Flamethrower Nemesis to deal with, and Flamethrower Nemesis is the best boss of this game. This is the one boss of the game where there is no RNG involved, there is actual skill involved with the way the fight goes, and it is not a dragged out scenario. There is an actual, like, diverse arrangement of moves that you can do, and it actually rewards you for actually approaching the section in different ways. Like, I'm going to be using the Magnum in the final phase of this encounter, but you don't have to use the Magnum. You can use your pistol on him if you're highly confident in your ability to dodge him, and save up on a lot of Magnum ammo for the later sections. Because the Magnum, it doesn't really have a lot of utilities from this point onward until we get to the laboratory area. And once we get to the laboratory area, the Magnum will be used a lot more when it comes to pale heads, or when it comes to any alpha parasites, for instance. But that right there, That fight is already done. Like, that right there is how the bosses in Resident Evil Village should have been. That is a fight that actually rewards you for saving on your ammunition. It actually elicits very specific kind of feedback depending on the weapon that you're using, and the fact that you're actually hitting his weak spot and getting a very specific kind of stun on him. Like, there's actual feedback involved in actually understanding what the hell you're doing. But I guess with the fact that they included the merchant system and the fact that the enemies are so simplistically designed and poorly designed, that just barely run right past them, and all of that together just allowed new Capcom to subconsciously design the bosses in a way where they have little to no skill involved. They removed all of the crucial hidden designs involved when it comes to stuns, and they just made the bosses damage sponges, and they didn't want you to actually be very skillful or even be intelligent or even try to go out of your way to understand the bosses. Like, there is no reward for understanding the bosses in Resident Evil Village. And even when you do find something really cool with the bosses in Resident Evil Village, you have to use such an inhuman and downright unrealistic method in order to find something really cool with them. Like, for instance, with Moreau, I had to actually use my shotgun to actually make Moreau flinch, to bypass his close range attack, and then I had to get stunned by his own body in order to force him to taunt and expose his weak spot, and therefore I was able to follow up on explosives. Like, the fact that I have to resort to that rather than actually resorting to skillfully designed stun systems, like what they demonstrated with Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, and 7, like the fact that I have to resort to a gamey strategy like that barely anyone will ever really discover, and the methods you have to go through in order to discover something like that are just downright childish. It's almost like that's new Capcom's way of saying, oh, let's view Resident Evil Village as a joke. Let's remove all the skill aspect from the game. Let's remove all these crucial fundamental designs that are actually befitting for so many games. But in Resident Evil, we actually make them well known. Like, let's remove all of that and let us make it very hard for the player to actually enjoy our game by removing all these elements and let them discover it through some very stupid methods befitting for that of a child. Like, is that really the message you want to send with Resident Evil Village? It's almost about as stupid as the Knives Out challenge for Resident Evil Village, and I need to talk about this point, but right now we're coming across a really dumb section in Resident Evil 3 Remake, and it is the rocket launcher section. And the rocket launcher section on Inferno difficulty is just another example of new Capcom not really grasping their own fundamental designs that they put in place with this section. This is a spectacle section, and they arbitrarily decided to put in player agency with this section by putting in new any-alpha parasites, and also with the fact that you have to wait around every single corner for Nemesis to start walking towards you, and you have to do this in order to stop Nemesis from doing his running attack on you, because if he does his running attack, he does it so fast that you have almost no time to dodge it. But right there, aim your grenade so that it blows up to the right of that any-alpha parasite, and it will blow it to the left, and then Nemesis will most likely take out that any-alpha parasite with his rocket launcher. And once again, I'm waiting around that corner for Nemesis to start walking, and as soon as he gets a little close to me, I'm going to move on to the next area. I'm going to blow up that any-alpha parasite, and I'm going to keep dodging his rockets. But if you don't have the grenade launcher for this section, it's just a really bad section, and Ether actually likes the way the section is designed because he said there's multiple ways to approach that section, like, for instance, with using a flash grenade, but I've already used my flash grenade for the Drain Demo section, and it's best to use the flash grenade there because Jill doesn't really encounter a lot of situations where the flash grenade is very useful, and it's really only the Drain Demo section that I've found to be very useful. And I know Ether has done an Infernal difficulty no shop items, like S rank, no save attempt at this, and he's actually done it successfully. But my biggest problem with that run is that he resorted to a lot of RNG, and I don't like resorting to RNG, and this is a walkthrough. My job as a walkthrough maker is to reduce as much RNG as possible to actually find a lot of consistency, and the fact that new Capcom didn't even understand their own game at this point, and they just decided to embrace a design that is very forceful in how it wants you to do it and just very rigid, that is just very poor decision-making on new Capcom's part. And relating this to the whole Knives Out challenge from Resident Evil Village, why the fuck would they promote Knives Out in a game that is fundamentally designed with all of the weapons in mind? Resident Evil 3 Remake does not promote knife only at all. The game actually understands what kind of a fucking game it is. It is a game that is designed with all the weapons in mind. Every single design choice put in place, with the way the enemies are placed, with the kind of sections that they put you in, with the amount of diverse scenarios that they put you in, they aren't complementary to knife only. And the complexity to the enemy designs in this game do not complement knife only as well. Like, when a developer has to design a Resident Evil game for knife only, they have to sacrifice a lot of the complexity put in place to actually make the game a lot more balanced for knife only. Like, Resident Evil Village, for some reason, decides to embrace a challenge that it doesn't follow suit with at all. You're sending the wrong message with that kind of challenge, and I talked about this ad nauseum in my Resident Evil 7 walkthrough, like my most recent version to my Resident Evil 7 walkthrough. Like, when you're saying that Resident Evil Village is designed for Knives Out, you're almost forcing the player to judge everything from a Knives Out perspective, and you're forcing people, or rather, you're encouraging people to indulge in a challenge that just makes Resident Evil Village look like an unfinished product. And people are trying to call that impressive. Like, there are people who do these Knives Out challenges in Resident Evil Village, and they do it with the Karambit, and they do it on Village of Shadows difficulty, and there are people in the comment section that call these kind of people that do these kind of runs impressive. Yet they're showcasing a broken experience. Like, I remember there's a channel called, like, Best Gamer Challenges, and I know this channel very well because LifeFailout000, I just happened to stumble upon him when he was commenting on one of those videos that guy posted, and I'm just wondering why he even associates with that kind of channel in the first place. But this guy, he showcased the Karambit only strategy, or rather the normal knife only strategy, against Bella on Village of Shadows difficulty. And he was just standing in the back area. The Moriekas were just, like, stuck on him, and then Bella wasn't doing anything. She was just standing there because of the way the AI interacts with each other in this game. And it's just like, what the fuck are you doing, new Capcom? Are you really saying that is how you want our game to be looked at? Are you fucking serious? Are you even caring about your own game? Do you even know what your own fundamental designs are in this game? And you're forcing the player to drag out scenarios? You're forcing the player to find holes in your programming? Are you saying that you intentionally put in those holes in your programming to somehow make the challenge befitting, like, for this game? Are you fucking serious? Like, again, it's almost like new Capcom wants you to view Resident Evil Village as a joke, yet they do not do the same with Resident Evil 3 Remake at all. They actually understood their own fundamental designs, that they didn't decide to arbitrarily put in a stupid Knives Out challenge. Like, the game actually understands what it's trying to be. It is trying to be a survival horror game, where ammo management is crucial, intelligent use of your ammunition is promoted, actual cool designs and actual hidden designs are encouraged with some of the enemies in Resident Evil 3 Remake, despite the bullshit that is apparent. Like, they're trying to encourage the player to indulge in that system and leave all those people who decide to do these kind of stupid runs of the game in the dust. Like, the people that do knife only in Resident Evil 3 Remake, and they just showcase a game that looks like it's 1% finished, those are the people that try to say, oh, it's the most impressive thing to do, yet these people are probably the most impotent individuals on the planet who don't even have any sense of fucking emotion. And they want to do something that is befitting for a drug addict seeking a fix, and it's almost self-destructive in its nature. It's like, what is this, an addiction problem, or do they not have the basic common sense that a normal human being is actually provided? I could give so many analogies to compare the whole idea of doing a very stupid run like that in this kind of game. Like, for instance, when you refuse to edit, like, very long live streams that showcase absolutely nothing but vapid gameplay, and the whole reason you put in edits into live streams is to remove all that to actually make your live streams easy to stomach. Or when you remove all the filler content from, like, the Dragon Ball Z era and actually make it digestible for the people who actually want to get to the parts that matter in Dragon Ball Kai or Dragon Ball Super. I swear to God, guys, these people that promote these kind of runs are the most conservative kind of individuals, and these are the kind of people that believe that an unfinished game is serviceable as a fucking product for the public. And it's funny I'm saying this because Ether had actually done a run of Resident Evil 3 Remake where he tried to do the game knife only, no save, no death on Infernal difficulty, and he said he had a lot of fun doing it, and that it was actually the most intense experience ever. But just because you feel those kind of feelings during the moment does not mean they're genuine feelings. That is your body betraying you. It's like adrenaline takes over you at that point. That's not like real emotion. That's just a lack of self-awareness, and it's just something that can easily plague a lot of us if we just don't have the self-awareness necessary to really comprehend that what we're doing is seriously a fucking waste of time. And it's just we're playing something that is just not befitting for a normal human being. And I'd be lying if I said I was actually impressed with what Ether did when he did that kind of run for Resident Evil 3 Remake. I didn't even watch all of it. I didn't even watch any of it. I watched like certain segments here and there, and I just didn't watch it at all. Like, that kind of run is pretty much the equivalent to kill all runs in every single game. I don't know what the whole appeal is for kill all runs, but I remember getting into this whole discussion about kill all runs and why I just hate them when it came to Resident Evil 6, because my former friends just glamorized the whole idea of kill all runs so much. But it's like, you're spending more time than necessary in a section. Like, you're wasting so much time just running around in circles, doing nothing, just twiddling your thumbs, just sitting on your asses, just waiting for a pointless enemy to come, and just interrupting the pacing of the game, and not doing it the way the developers actually designed the game. Like, that is just befitting of a burned out gamer, and lo and behold, my friends don't even like do anything for YouTube anymore, and they haven't posted anything in so long, and the things that they did for Resident Evil 6 when they were just busy doing kill all runs and pistol only runs, like doing those restrictions at the same time, like, it's just indicative of a burned out gamer, and indicative of someone who just struggles to really find any enjoyment, in all honesty. Like, just the level of desperation involved with that to somehow get some kind of enjoyment out of that, and you're having to compromise the game in order to do it and engage in very self-destructive behaviors like that. That is just fucking feeble. That is really feeble. And what new Capcom is saying is that they fully support that whole mentality when they decide to put in a Knives Out challenge for Resident Evil Village. And if you've seen my Let's Shit on new Capcom and Resident Evil Village by doing Knives Out on Village of Shadows difficulty, you will totally understand why doing Knives Out in Resident Evil Village isn't practical and the gameplay is severely compromised when you are engaging in that kind of stupid restriction. And like I said, by glamorizing Knives Out in Resident Evil Village, it's like new Capcom is trying to acknowledge their own shortcomings in programming by displaying that kind of challenge in the challenges list for Resident Evil Village. And the challenges overall are very shit in Resident Evil Village, because a lot of them aren't even practical to do on Village of Shadows difficulty. And the whole idea of a challenge is an actual challenge that's actually fucking difficult, but most of them are just framed with like easy difficulty in mind. So where is the whole challenge involved in that, if you're forcing the player to compromise their own gameplay experience by playing on an easier difficulty, where the enemies do absolutely nothing? But going back to the whole idea of Knives Out in Resident Evil Village, when new Capcom is trying to acknowledge that they did a shit job with their programming, are they really saying that the best way to approach the bosses is to actually find the holes in their programming and just loop certain designs? Like, are they seriously expecting you to, say for instance, bait out Lady Dimitrescu's big like thrust attack and just get behind her and just knife her legs repeatedly, and then you have to waste so much time just waiting for her to fly away and just come back into the arena and just repeat this ad nauseum for like 25 minutes? Or with Moreau, are they seriously expecting you to just stay near Moreau the whole time and just knife him when he does his close range attack, or just get him stuck on corners? Are they seriously expecting you to find those kind of holes in the designs and actually just exploit them to your advantage? Why are you encouraging the player to do that? Yeah, they do not encourage this at all in Resident Evil 3 Remake. And I'm almost certain it is the Resident Evil 2 Remake team that designed Resident Evil Village. And I know my subscriber Pulkit Sharma has mentioned that there are certain portions of the Resident Evil 2 Remake team that were involved in Resident Evil Village, and certain portions of the Resident Evil 7 team. And, you know, he originally said like 50-50, but I'm like, is that really true? Because it feels like 1% of the Resident Evil 7 team was involved in Resident Evil Village, and he said don't quote me on the percentages, so thank God he said that, because that would have been absolutely absurd if the Resident Evil 7 team contributed to a vast percentage of Resident Evil Village, because there's no way in hell they would ever allow the shit designs that were put in place in Resident Evil Village, as well as that shit challenge. There's no way they would ever allow those to be apparent in Resident Evil Village. Like, I shouldn't have to be explaining the whole folly of putting in a Knives Out challenge in a game that is intrinsically designed with all the weapons in mind. I should not have to explain this. If I have to explain this, then you don't deserve to be in this world. You're not human. Like, if I have to explain this to people, then it's clear that you guys are seriously brain dead. You have a low IQ. If you need someone to explain why implementing a challenge like that in a game that is designed with all the weapons in mind and not with the knife in mind, Like, I should not have to explain this to you. And once again, citing some more examples, are they expecting you to just get Bella stuck in a corner and just, like, repeatedly knife at the Moriekas and hope they get stunned, and just tank all the damage and spam healing items? Are they seriously expecting you to play Resident Evil Village like a toddler? Are they seriously expecting you to play it like some retard? Just spamming healing items like crazy? Is that really what they're trying to go for with that challenge? And it's even more concerning when you think that with the challenges involved in Resident Evil Village, they surely have to be play tested, right? People surely QA tested to see if the challenges were done. But you're telling me that you QA tested Resident Evil Village and you thought it was actually serviceable as a game designed for Knives Out? I can understand this being promoted in Resident Evil 1 Remake and Resident Evil 2 Remake. I mean, it wasn't promoted in Resident Evil 2 Remake, actually. There was no challenges in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Or actually there were. I think there were challenges, but they didn't put a Knives Out challenge for Resident Evil 2 Remake. You just kind of knew that the game was designed for knife only based on the fundamental designs. You actually looked deep enough. And even before Resident Evil 2 Remake released, they confirmed that the game was designed for knife only. Although ironically, they confirmed that Resident Evil 3 Remake was designed for knife only when it actually isn't designed for knife only. Like, you'd have to be a fool to think that Resident Evil 3 Remake was designed for knife only without actually looking at the game from a deeper perspective. But that's just the difference in perspective right there. You have a superficial perspective and a deeper perspective. Superficially, the game might look like it's designed for knife only when you're actually looking at these kind of channels, but if you don't have the basic comprehension to actually see that what they're promoting is a false experience and a broken experience, then you are just not able to have that distinction properly laid out to you. It's almost like when people say that the level design in Resident Evil 1 Remake is not linear, and they say it's the most impressive level design ever. Like, superficially, Resident Evil 1 Remake might look like it is designed with a non-linear level format, when in actuality, to get the best optimized route, you're going to be taking one path anyway, and the game even puts enemies in your way to force you to go down one specific path. So you're always going to be playing a linear experience on every single playthrough of Resident Evil 1 Remake. And when the game is designed for knife only, you need to have a linear experience to actually make it accommodating for that. And Resident Evil 1 Remake does that very well. Of course, very well is bad when you have the simple enemy designs put in place and the shitty boss designs and shitty enemy types and just the clear boredom expressed when sitting through loading doors and the like. But just not focusing on that right now. Going back to what I was saying, Resident Evil Village having that stupid Knives Out challenge is a bad thing. Resident Evil 3 Remake not having that Knives Out challenge is a great thing. The game actually understands what kind of game it is. The developers actually displayed a little bit more competency with comprehending their own designs in Resident Evil 3 Remake, and they did not display that same level of competency when comprehending their own designs in Resident Evil Village. And to talk to Ether real quick, Ether, what I said to you about your challenge not being that impressive at all, and really I don't understand why you embrace that kind of run in Resident Evil 3 Remake. Don't think anything of it, but just to give you a warning, Ether, if you happen to embrace more runs like that, rather than the runs that you do where you do like no save, no damage, like all those kind of very interesting runs that actually showcase the full potential of the game, like, if you start to showcase runs that clearly demonstrate that the game isn't designed for that kind of restriction, and you try to take pleasure from that, or your fans try to take a lot of pleasure from that, then I'm seriously going to be pissed off at you, and I might as well, like, unsubscribe from your channel. That's just the warning I'll give you, Ether. If you decide to go down that pathetic route, like every single burned-out gamer and delusional gamer does when they want to get some kind of new experience out of their game, rather than actually going with the flow of the game and actually returning to games from a fresher mindset. That's why you always wait a while before you go back to your game, so that you don't end up having that burned-out and delusional mindset. You return to these games from a fresh mindset. That's why I can still enjoy doing Resident Evil 3 Remake with these kind of restrictions. Not once throughout my whole entire playthroughs of Resident Evil 3 Remake do I ever consider the possibility of doing a very shitty restricted run like what everyone does, because that is just disrespectful to the game. That is just encouraging new Capcom to embrace very stupid design choices, like with implementing that challenge for Resident Evil Village with Knives Out and on Village of Shadows difficulty. And it's just incredibly self-destructive to myself and myself as a gamer. That is why I never give any thought to these. If the thought ever occurred to me, it was likely because I was trying to do a stupid run like what I demonstrated with Let's Shit on Resident Evil Village by doing Knives Out and Village of Shadows difficulty. Or if I'm intentionally trying to force myself to understand that boss better. Like, I've recently been going through Urias, and I've been learning how to avoid his various moves, because Urias is a very bullshit fight in Resident Evil Village. And I've definitely learned how to avoid a lot of his moves, but I don't try to apply that kind of restriction to the full game. I only apply that restriction to certain like parts of a game, not the full game, so that I put myself in that unique situation to look at things from a different perspective. That's really what I do, but not something that glamorizes the game to be designed like this. That's why I do it. And seriously, Ether, I mean it. I'm giving you that warning. If you decide to embrace those kind of shitty runs in the future, that's if you happen to watch this video, though. But I think that's enough about that. That is enough about me just disgracing all these people that decide to embrace these kind of runs. That's me just being done disgracing new Capcom and the fact that they decided to glamorize that shitty Knives Out challenge in Resident Evil Village. Let's return to this right now. So, I've just done Nemesis 2. Nemesis 2 actually caught me out a couple of times because I was just being very stupid in my approach to him. And also, that whole method of circling the statue, I did get a couple of moments where, for some reason, Nemesis's AI was just being very stupid, and he ran right past me. And when he ran right past me and he did his close-range attack, he ended up hitting me because I just couldn't see what was happening, which was very odd. So that's why you got to make sure you don't take too sharp of an angle when you're running around that statue. If you want to see a better fight of that, check out Ether's channel with his like infernal difficulty, no save, no damage, like speed run. Because he killed Nemesis 2 very quickly, but I imagine he opened himself up to a lot of bad designs and a lot of RNG involved with how Nemesis 2's AI behaves, because he's a very dumb AI. Like, he sometimes has to walk towards you before he initiates a close-range attack. Other times he just attacks you immediately, and there are certain attacks that he does that have a really shitty hitbox. Like, some of his running attacks and his jumping grab that he does, his two jumping grabs that he does a second jumping grab in the third encounter with him, but he can hit you before he even gets near you. The hitbox on that is broken because the active frame period is placed too early in the animation, so if you don't dodge early, you will always get hit by it. It is so bullshit. But that is why I always resort to using the statue method, and of course it's a walkthrough, so I have to demonstrate something that a lot of people will be able to do. And occasionally I'll demonstrate those kind of high-octane, just very skillful strategies that not a lot of people can do, but it's definitely the best way to approach a section. But with certain parts, like with Nemesis 2, it's a different exception. Nemesis 3, however, it's a little different. And Nemesis 3 was a big pain in the ass for this particular walkthrough. He killed me so many times, and it was because I was trying to do a whole method of skipping the second phase and just delaying the zombies from spawning in. But the problem was, when I got to the third phase and the zombies actually started spawning in, because Nemesis returns back into the arena very quickly, it gives the zombies more opportunity to be threats because I'm so focused on Nemesis, or vice versa. And that was why Nemesis 3 was proven to be a big problem. Oh, and also right here, this is a really shitty section as well. This is another example of a bullcrap section that is inherent to Resident Evil 3 Remake, but you don't encounter that much in Resident Evil Village. Why the fuck would they put 2 hunters in this room, and you're playing as a character that is incapable of fighting against these hunters? And just the method I had to utilize to get rid of that first hunter so that he's not a nuisance. Like, why would they place the first hunter so close to the door so that flash grenades are very useless and actually getting past him and he can attack you while he's blinded? And also, why is it that they would put the 2 hunters in such a room where they just bounce around all the time and the room isn't befitting for the kind of capabilities that they have? And why would they have Carlos go against them? Because Carlos has a punch, and the hunter's attacks are designed with the dodge system in mind, because Jill is a lot more capable of fighting hunters compared to Carlos, and at least Jill has the weaponry to deal with them, but Carlos doesn't. So because of these massive oversights on the developer's part, I was forced to bring the first hunter into the room, punch him, shoot him, run into the other room to mess with his AI because he has a lot of trouble getting back into that room where he came from, wait a little for the knockback generated by the punch to reset, at least from what I've noticed. Sometimes it doesn't work, where you just wait for a little bit and the knockback doesn't generate. And then you have to punch him before he attacks, and then you repeat the process. Now, isn't that a graceful approach that players need to go down, new Capcom? No, it isn't. I'm so glad I didn't do no save as one of my restrictions. This game has too much bullcrap to put up with, and having to go through that boring introduction to this game, which is definitely a very shitty introduction for a game that is intrinsically designed for speedrunning, and then having to lose this walkthrough to a bullcrap design, such as a bullcrap hitbox, just enemies behaving very oddly and the like, and then having to run through areas over and over again, it just isn't worth it. My own enjoyment of this game will be even more compromised by doing no save. Like, Ether can put up with that, but I can't. I don't know how he has like the patience to put up with doing like no save. Like I can do no save, no damage for the Not a Hero DLC from Resident Evil 7 because it's at least a well-designed piece of content. And you're at least getting back into gameplay. You're not having to sit through like long segments of vapid gameplay. Like everything you're doing in the Not a Hero DLC, everything is crucial, everything is important. There's not a single section that feels like it doesn't belong there. And unlike this game and Resident Evil Village, the Not a Hero DLC is actually well designed. Every single mistake I make in the Not a Hero DLC, it's always my fault. And I can put up with that. I can put up with the fact that it was my fault for actually messing up on a part in the Not a Hero DLC. But when it comes to Resident Evil 3 Remake and Resident Evil Village, when there are designs put in place where it is not my fault for messing up on a section, why should I ever glamorize that by doing no save? Like, if I'm doing no save for a game, then it must mean that the game is well designed, right? I don't want to send that message at all with Resident Evil 3 Remake and Resident Evil Village. Like, those games are fun. Resident Evil Village, I do like more than Resident Evil 3 Remake, but it still has a lot of bullcrap, although Resident Evil 3 Remake has a lot more bullcrap. And going back to what I said previously, I don't know how Ether can put up with doing no save in these games when he's forced to go through the entire game again. Like, that's just what it is at that point. It's pretty much patience versus skill. Like, the skill level that you're exerting between doing this game with the saves and doing this game without the saves, it's all pretty much like the same kind of skill level. It's just you're having the patience to put up with mistakes in no save. But who would want to go through that when the game is just fucking you over with its poor designs? That's really what I don't understand about the whole no save restriction. I'm not trying to downgrade Ether's runs whatsoever, because Ether's runs of Resident Evil 3 Remake with Inferno, no damage, no save are really impressive. Very, very impressive, and they actually showcase the full potential of the game. But when it comes to just delivering like a walkthrough format, or when it comes to just going through the game in general, it's hard for me to not really find any appreciation in that. And I need to pause in this tangent right now, because we're doing the Defend Jill sequence, a diverse scenario that is well-deserved because this game is designed with all the weapons in mind, and it actually punishes you for not saving up on your resources intelligently. Doing the sequence without the grenades is a pain in the ass, because the hunters take a beating. Even though they have reduced health, they still take a beating. And what I'm trying to do right here is I am trying to save 4 zombies. If you save 4 zombies, you will pause the spawn. And I'm using this generator to my advantage in order to keep them stunned. And hopefully, when I'm on one side of the area, they're looking at me. Because if I go to the other side while they're stunned, they'll have to go through an additional turning animation. And it will delay them when it comes to attacking me. And I'm going to use the stumble mechanic as well. You see that? I knocked that enemy into the other enemy, and they got stumbled. Beautiful design right there. That is Resident Evil 4 design with the stumble mechanic. And sadly, that design just isn't apparent in Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil Village. It's more apparent in Resident Evil 3 Remake. Yet again, another great example of new Capcom neglecting really balanced designs like that to help deal with these multiple enemies and just these big encounters. But you just don't get that in Resident Evil Village at all. Thank God as well. Like, you mainly get these kind of big encounters with the intro Lycan ambush section and also the Stronghold Lycan encounter, but you're forced to rely upon like exploits and the like rather than using skill because of how shit those sections are designed. Like with the intro Lycan ambush section, you pretty much just use a barrier and just shoot the Lycans through the door, and they cannot ever have the thought of going through the floor to get behind you. They never do that unless you decide to go through the floor yourself. And then with the Stronghold Lycan encounter, you just bait out the long-range grabs and just use exploit areas to reset their spawns, and that's how you approach it because of how shit the game is designed. And also, the point where the second hunter spawns, you gotta pay attention to the shutters when they're roughly at Carlos's head, because that's normally when you want to kill the zombies and then use a grenade. And that right there was a very shitty design. The fact that they decided to put in 2 different grenade throwing animations depending on how the camera is, I ended up throwing the grenades with an overhand swing rather than an underhand swing. And because the overhand swing was just high enough, it clipped on the ceiling, and I wasn't able to stun them very well. But there's not that many enemies left, so I just need to get rid of them. It's good that they reduce the enemy health. Why is it that in Resident Evil Village, they reduce the health of the Lycans in Urias's encounter, yet they don't reduce the health of the Moriekas in Bella's boss fight? And instead, they have the same amount of health as the normal Moriekas you encounter in the entire world. So because of this, you're forced to rely upon this really dumb method, this very gamey method of skipping the initial cutscene to Bella when Ethan falls to the ground so that she doesn't glitch out at the very beginning of the fight where she's just doing absolutely nothing. Use a pipe bomb, shoot a window to stun Bella, and then you need to... I forgot to mention, you have to use a mine before the encounter starts, where you start the cutscene. But continuing on, you then use 2 shotgun shells to get rid of the last Morieka, because for some reason the 2 Moriekas don't have the exact same health. And then you're able to fight Bella. Why such a tedious intro before you're able to get into the real fight? That right there is just a great example of very shit enemy placement. And I think this is actually a comparison worth noting, because Inferno difficulty, the enemy placements that they give you, a lot of them are very negligible at best. I mean, they do rearrange the Hunter Gamma placements, and that's really cool. But every other enemy placement that they give you on Inferno difficulty is entirely negligible. Not a single moment in Resident Evil 3 Remake, aside from the Hunter Gammas, do they ever put in any kind of sequence where there's a noticeable difference in playstyle between hardcore difficulty and Inferno difficulty. And this right here is cool. They at least put a liquor here rather than a bunch of annoying zombies. So it shows that they respect the lethality of the liquor compared to the zombies. That right there is another intelligent enemy placement. About as intelligent as replacing the number of molded you encounter in the basement with fast molded, because they trust that enemy to deliver a very lethal performance, and they don't try to put in multiple enemies in these very small rooms because their AI messes up and they screw with each other's ability to attack you. So it just makes it look stupid, and it just makes it impossible to really gauge when you're supposed to dodge because of how broken the AI can be when they're paired up together. So the fact that they favored that with this is wonderful. But other than what I've just listed in Resident Evil 3 Remake, every other enemy placement just feels negligible. Nothing else. I mean, aside from the rocket launcher sequence with the anti-alpha parasites, but that's not an intelligent enemy placement. That's a bad enemy placement to arbitrarily put in player agency into a spectacle section when it isn't deserved at all. Spectacle sections don't work when you have player agency involved, because originally, when spectacle sessions are designed, they aren't designed with the player having to engage in very crucial elements to a section, but just putting it in arbitrarily without properly playtesting it, and instead you're favoring a very rigid design. That's really dumb, so that's why I consider it to be a very negligible enemy placement. And then with Resident Evil Village, there's really only 7 enemy placements worth noting, and they're all entirely negligible. Nothing to change your experiences between hardcore difficulty and Village of Shadows difficulty. So it seems like this trend of very poor enemy placements on the highest difficulty, it's a thing with Resident Evil 3 Remake and Resident Evil Village. And it just makes you wonder, if a portion of the Resident Evil 3 Remake team was actually involved in the design processes that went into designing Village of Shadows difficulty for Resident Evil Village. It feels like they took a certain percentage of the team who designed Resident Evil 2 Remake and a certain percentage of the team that designed Resident Evil 3 Remake, and they just made that the development team for Resident Evil Village, but unfortunately they took the worst percentage by far from those teams, and that's why Resident Evil Village is just a very broken game with very underwhelming levels and underwhelming enemy designs and underwhelming bosses and underwhelming gameplay designs. And Village of Shadows difficulty isn't even a real difficulty. You'd be getting the same exact experience if you were to do hardcore difficulty, no damage, without the merchant. Whereas Village of Shadows difficulty is just Occam's razor. You're using the merchant system to get the same kind of experience with the sections that you would be getting on hardcore difficulty. So it's just a fake difficulty. It's just hardcore difficulty, but the enemies have way more life, and you're pretty much forced to use the merchant at that point. That right there is a very shit difficulty design, because that's not a real difficulty. It's a false difficulty. And Inferno difficulty, it's just nightmare difficulty, but without the ability to save. And the final boss does a lot more moves on Inferno difficulty compared to nightmare difficulty. So it's another lazy design choice, but at least it has a better foundation to it. I say better foundation, what am I saying? I've already listed a lot of the poor designs present with Infernal difficulty, and why it's nowhere near as intelligent as Madhouse difficulty from Resident Evil 7. Madhouse difficulty is a difficulty. Infernal difficulty on this game isn't so much of a difficulty because of how similar it is to Nightmare difficulty, and then Village of Shadows difficulty is the worst kind of difficulty because it's not a difficulty, it's a joke difficulty. And I'm guessing that's why they make it where the challenges in Resident Evil Village aren't designed around Village of Shadows difficulty, and I'm guessing that's why they don't bother trying to rearrange the enemies or actually put in all these interesting designs to change up your playstyle very differently to hardcore difficulty. It's just very sad when you think about it like that. And like I said, it leads me to believe that the Resident Evil 3 Remake team had some influence over Resident Evil Village. Like, Infernal difficulty is already hated by so many people. Even Carcinogen SDA hates Infernal difficulty. And Village of Shadows difficulty has just, like, done the same thing. They've created a very shit difficulty that's just a fake difficulty. And instead, they favor very broken designs. They favor bosses that take way too much punishment. They favor a merchant system that influences the natural progression of the game to get the same kind of experience that you would be getting on hardcore difficulties. There's no difference in difficulty at that point. They favor broken designs. They favor just laughable designs. Like, if you've seen the difference in performance between Bella's boss fight on a hardcore difficulty and Village of Shadows difficulty, you'll understand that when you don't skip the cutscene early on Bella's boss fight on hardcore difficulty, she always attacks. But if you skip the cutscene too early on Village of Shadows difficulty, she gets those moments where she doesn't attack because of the Moriekas, because of the way they recognize your hitbox when you skip the cutscene too early, and because they're recognizing your hitbox at that moment, and they're trying to do an attack, I imagine, that's why Bella gets those moments where she doesn't attack. Like, massive oversights like that could easily be identified by a 5-year-old, New Capcom decided to favor for difficulty design in Resident Evil Village. What the fuck is that? Is that really indicative of a AAA developer? That right there is indicative of a fan-based developer. A developer designing a fan-based game that doesn't have the same level of quality as a AAA title. And they've been developing how many Resident Evil games? And they still favor this kind of, like, laughable design. Like, for instance, with Resident Evil 0 with the infected bat and the fact that the auto-aim just messes with you all the time whenever you're doing that encounter. Is that really, like, a great example of good difficulty design? Is that really a great example of functional game design? Are you for real? Are you absolutely for real? That is just mind-blowing, to say the least. There's not a word I can give to describe the sheer retardedness of New Capcom's development team. I'm at a loss of words with that, but I need to pause on that right now because we're doing the laboratory area, and the laboratory area isn't so bad. If you have the resources necessary, you can decimate these enemies. I'm going to be using the mine rounds in order to take out these enemies, because the enemy alpha parasites have so much phantom range on their attacks, and the inconsistencies involved with the speed of their attacks is also something worth noting, and that's why you gotta take them out with the high-powered weaponry, and then the pale heads are equally annoying. There are so many moments with the pale heads where I shoot them in the legs with a shotgun and they don't flinch, or when I shoot them while they're running towards me, they don't flinch. Yeah, I get opposite results at times. So it just varies with what these enemies choose to do, because New Capcom designed these enemies so poorly, and they just instead decided to just steal the enemies from Resident Evil 2 Remake and put them into this game without properly playtesting them, without actually making sure they're accommodating for the systems put in place with Resident Evil 3 Remake. I cannot believe they would do that. Like, that right there is a very lazy enemy design right there. Like, any other parasites are a brand new enemy and they're shit. Paleheads are a reused enemy and they're shit. So it's just a cadre of shit enemies, because New Capcom doesn't have the self-awareness necessary to see what they're doing. Not with this section, however. This section is really well designed, because it punishes you for not having acid rounds. Acid rounds are so powerful against hunters. 2 acid rounds will generally take them out so long as you time your shots correctly. And if you need to have a better insurance policy to ensure that the hunters stay dead, try to hit them with the shotgun or with the grenade launcher while they're stunned by the acid. And this right here, I'm going to use 2 of the acid rounds, and I'm going to use... that was a mistake. I meant to use the explosive rounds, but I accidentally swapped to incendiary rounds. It's a very, like, cumbersome process trying to swap between the grenades, and whenever you run out of the ammunition type for one grenade, you automatically swap to another grenade. So if you accidentally press L1, you'll accidentally swap to another arrangement of grenades, and it can be very frustrating when it happens. I assumed it was the result of the auto reload, but it's not. It's an automatic process, so you gotta pay attention to when you're supposed to press L1 to swap between the grenades, and when you're reloading, you cannot dodge, so you have to swap weapons in order to stop yourself from not dodging, which is another massive oversight, because in Resident Evil Revelations, you could dodge while reloading, yet you can't in this game. What is that about? Surely certain members from the Resident Evil Revelations team were involved in this. How could they miss out on something as basic as that? That right there just doesn't make any sense at all. And I've reached the hour mark on my recording, so I'm going to have to pause this right here, and I'll be right back. So now we have a boss fight that took quite a while to do. This is the worst boss ever in Resident Evil 3 Remake. It is a reskin of the second boss fight that we just did at the clock tower, only now Nemesis has zombies supporting him. So when the titular antagonist of Resident Evil 3 needs zombies to support him, what does that say about your main antagonist? It is so effeminate, and not only that, but from a gameplay perspective, this is horrible. The zombies just mess with your ability to deal with Nemesis. Nemesis messes with your ability to deal with the zombies. Like, this feels more like a damage race than an actual fight, and especially with the reskin aspect. Why would they reskin a boss fight that you just did back at the clock tower area? They couldn't think of something original to do with Nemesis, like they could with the treatment plant fight in the original version of Resident Evil 3, that actually demanded intelligent use of your environment and actual understanding as to how Nemesis's moveset works. And there was actual like skill involved. You could even do it knife only, and it involved you like pushing these levers to release acid in order to damage Nemesis. 3 hits from the acid and he's dead. And what they've done with this is they've made it where the acid only applies in the final phase. So you won't be able to use the acid at all during the first and second phase. And I've just done the first phase right there, which I always do with the shotgun. And then this is the part where I was trying to skip the second phase, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to use the incendiary grenades to really do a lot of damage to him and stun him. He only gets damaged by the incendiary grenades when he's not on fire, which is dumb. And when he's on fire, what I do is I fire either 3 explosive rounds or 3 mine rounds, because by the time he recovers from the 3rd stun, he will not be on fire, and I will be able to set him on fire again using the flame round, and it's just a continuous stun lock on him. And the grenade launcher just doesn't do a lot of damage to him, because the explosive rounds do like 1% of damage to his life. And I think the mine rounds do even less. And the flame rounds and the acid rounds are really the most damaging thing against Nemesis. And it's so stupid, like, how much punishment he can take. And there is no way to capitalize on the stun when he's on fire or when he's in the middle of a stun animation, which is bullshit. Absolutely bullshit. That being said, though, there is one cool design that I can appreciate about Nemesis. When you shoot him out of the air, whenever he does the jump attack or he does the jumping grab, you can actually put him into a state where his heart is exposed. And if you shoot his heart, it does a lot of damage to him, but it's mainly with the shotgun, because the shotgun does a lot more damage than the Magnum and the grenade launcher somehow, which doesn't make any sense at all. Like, you would expect the Magnum to do more damage, given that it's a high-powered weapon, and Magnums in the Resident Evil games have always been more powerful than the shotguns. But for some reason, the roles are reversed with this boss fight. And you see this move right here? This move has a really shitty hitbox, because this is a move where the active frame period is placed incorrectly in his animation, because he can grab you way too early in the attack animation. And I have a blooper saved at the end of this walkthrough. Like, I've saved a lot of bloopers from this boss fight and also from the final boss. Like, these boss fights are pretty bad. I mean, the final boss is decent, but it's not a very good final boss. The amount of problems that it has with hitboxes and the stupid pustules and the RNG, it's not a good final boss at all. If there's one thing that Resident Evil Village does a lot better, it's a final boss. Mother Miranda is a lot of fun, even if her phase transition animations can be very bullshit when she transitions from, like, the flying phase into the first phase form. Or when she decides to roost on top of you whenever she decides to do the orb attack, and she's just continually, like, sitting right above you, and you have to stay close to her in order to avoid that. And also, Mother Miranda doesn't have enemies supporting her. She's the titular antagonist of Resident Evil Village, and she doesn't need enemies supporting her, which further credits her role as the final boss and the main antagonist of Resident Evil Village, if she's able to take on Ethan without the need of pawns in her little game, which is amazing. Yet Nemesis here, he needs zombies to support him because he's too incapable at dealing with Jill, apparently. Like, talk about underwhelming for a boss fight. They really did Nemesis poorly in this game. Like, I don't mind the fact that he's reserved for scripted encounters, because the systems put in place do not accommodate for Nemesis randomly appearing throughout Raccoon City. But when he's utilized as poorly as this is really where the game really shows its true colors with how poorly implemented Nemesis is. Reskin of the second boss fight, and he needs zombies to support him. Like, the second boss fight against Nemesis overall is a very easy fight, despite the minor mistakes that I made that cost me like my attempts at this walkthrough. But this right here is just, it's the same fight, but in order to add some level of difficulty, because they were too lazy to actually come up with something interesting for a third final boss that was actually drastic, they just give zombies. And the paleheads are so bullshit in the third boss fight, because the amount of times I have shot my shotgun at a palehead while it's running towards me, and it has not flinched, and it's grabbed me, it's probably because if you time your shotgun incorrectly, the grab just supersedes the shotgun, but it shouldn't do that. And the points where I have shot at the palehead where it should have been stunned, it should have made a lot of sense, but it didn't, which is bullshit. And we now have the final boss right here. I originally considered this to be the hardest boss ever in the entire Resident Evil series, but really, this is a very, like, RNG heavy fight where bad hitboxes and bad RNG on the pustules reign supreme compared to actual skill. I mean, look at that just then. Look how much range the pustules have in actually stunning Jill. Why do they have to give that kind of flinch animation to Jill when the pustules don't even land anywhere near her? That is so bullshit. And the worst part is, that flinch animation that she goes to does not give you iframes. It's the same exact animation from Resident Evil 4 and 5, yet in those games, you got iframes during that animation. An uncontrollable animation with varying degrees of triggers should always give you iframes if you have no kind of control over it. And when you're going to put in phantom range on those pustules to cause that kind of animation, and you get no iframes during it, that right there is just borderline bullshit. Also, when Nemesis does his, like, slam attack, where he just repeatedly slams you, and you gotta roll into the corners or just, like, dodge the last one that is very slow, if any of the pustules land right near you, you're dead. There is no chance you're going to survive. And here's the move right here. If these pustules choose to fire acid at me while I'm busy dodging this chain slam move, I'm done for. No chance of avoiding it. And also, whenever you're in those corners, if Nemesis chooses to do the attack where he does a swipe on his right side, and then he goes to the left, and then he goes to the right, and then he does the chain slam move, if he does that when you're in that corner, you've got to dodge it, because it has phantom range. It's so bullshit. And that right there was really bullshit. You see that? The arms are right behind me, but because of the fact that this game's reticle is simplistically designed, it prioritized what was in camera view rather than factoring in where Jill is exactly. That right there is really dumb. And you'll notice that I did get 2 of the batteries. If you can stun Nemesis at the correct position and you just get on the batteries immediately, you'll be able to end the fight a lot quicker. And see this right here? If you stay in this corner, you're fine. But right here, if he chose to do his swipe move, I was done for. Like, that right there, I managed to stop the swipe move by getting on the battery. If you get on the battery while his arms are not glowing, you will cancel whatever he is doing, and he will try to grab you, but it's a slow grab. If you try to get on these batteries while his arms are glowing, he will just transition into an instant grab, and there's no way to avoid it, and you will die. Like, you've got to use the batteries intelligently if you want to actually stop some of his bullshit attacks. And again, the fact that I'm having to use something like that to bypass poor designs in a fight that should have been better designed, that right there is really retarded. I mean, it's still a fun fight, but if these hitboxes and the pustules were actually designed a lot better, then this would be a truly memorable fight. But sadly, this fight is just, it's a mess, let me tell you. It's a real mess. Like, I can appreciate the fact that Nemesis has a wide variety of moves at his disposal on Inferno difficulty, but when they're that poorly designed, and the developers have devoted little to no time to understanding the potential scenarios that you yourself can be put into that allows those moves to be very bullshit, that's almost on the same levels as Moreau, with the kind of attacks that Moreau can do, where the scenarios that you can be put into where Moreau is able to do an attack that you're not able to avoid, it can be very bullshit. But this is effectively the end of this updated walkthrough, and now for a couple of bloopers coming up. So after this whole ranking scene, you'll see the bloopers. There's the S rank, there's the times I've saved, and this right here, I get very, very lucky right here. Look at that. Look how fair that hitbox is, but then you have the zombie putting pressure on me. Like, the zombies just, they add an unnecessary element to the fight that's really bad. And then this right here, Nemesis knocks me over, and then I get punished during my animation. No chance of avoiding it, and that doesn't even do any damage to you when you get knocked over by that. And this right here, the payload ignores the shotgun, and Nemesis is able to get a free hit on me, which is bullshit. And then this right here is why you should never put in these kind of enemies in a boss fight, especially for a reskin of a boss that didn't have any enemies supporting him. So because they've arbitrarily put in these enemies here, it doesn't work properly, and it's just a mess. Like, look at this. This is an absolute mess. And now we have this, and what exactly happens right here? Well, I get caught while reloading, because you cannot dodge while reloading. Bullshit. And then right here, the payload doesn't flinch, which is bullshit. And then look at this hitbox right here. He grabs me so early into the animation, like before he's even touched me. Absolutely fucking bullshit. And now we have the final boss encounters right here. And look, right here. If it does this, you're dead. Like, if he fires that acid right at you while you're rolling, you're done for. No chance of avoiding it. And same case again, bullshit. Absolutely bullshit. And then this right here, Nemesis hits me without touching me. This is what happens when you're in this corner. And you've got to avoid whatever attack he does. Like, I got touched by nothing. That right there is crap. Absolute crap. And this right here, this is the first time this has ever happened to me, but I thought Nemesis could never attack you while you're busy getting the ammo, but he actually can. And you'll see right here he hits me. How is that possible? Like, normally when he's just busy, like, mindlessly attacking in this part, he's actively tracking you in a way that you never get hit, but for some reason it was different in this case. So either that was the worst luck ever, or he's actually intended to attack you here, but the developers do a very poor job at communicating that. And, you know, like, why do you bother doing that? Like, why do you not let the player get the chance to actually get all that pistol ammo and grenades before actually starting the fight? Or, I don't know, like, if you're gonna make it like this, give me all that pistol ammo and the grenades before the actual fight begins. That just makes a lot more sense than doing that. But that's pretty much it, and that is the end of this entire walkthrough. Stay tuned for my future walkthroughs. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.